Albert speaks of a beautiful story. Unfortunately, that story is better to be told in a best-selling fictional novel as opposed to an open finals round. The reason for that is, I also kind of disagree with Andre, by the way. In a war motion, or rather in an actual war, it is not about reducing casualties. It's about finishing the war as quickly as possible. And that probably means that in this debate, in closing government, we're willing to say that probably both sides people die anyway. Either it is dying because of weapon in opening government, either it's dying because of weapons supplied by the US in opening opposition, or if you don't do anything, they die of starvation. They die of being forced to work endless hours by the military junta. People die. In closing government, we say that's probably a lost cause right now. The extension of closing government is only going to support a prevention of future expansion of military junta, especially in such an unstable Sahel and Western Africa region. First of all, though, I have a lot of questions of opposition. The first is what I asked in a PY to Elgar. Why then would the military junta want to listen to you if you actually actively support and supply weapon to people who are actively opposing them? Secondly, who will you give the weapon and you give the money to? I asked them, I didn't ask that, I asked them in the POI. And then they said, oh, we can get other insurgents. Only by reference to context slide. Probably that means that the insurgents are only people who are affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, obviously, because insurgents without affiliation would probably not have resources or probably have enough political capital anyway. So that probably means that you have to supply weapon to them. So if you want to talk about Al-Qaeda rising, you yourself in opening opposition or even op-bench in general actively empowers them because you give them the opportunity to fight against a greater evil right now. But again, as I mentioned in the POI, you create a prolonged civil war in their side of the house, which has far less conflict resolution possibility. Finally, it's quite ridiculous when opposition says, but the West is hated. If the US is hated, the moment you step foot, either it is with a gun or either it is on a negotiation table, you're going to be hated in both sides of the house. People think that the aid or the food that you send are poison. People think that the weapon that you supply are actually actively being used against your neighbors. So that probably means that if you want to create any possible peaceful resolution for diplomacy, you have to first obliterate the existing regime, regardless of whatever the casualties needed. And then you can step in, and then we can say that we liberated you, and now we are here to give you the salvation that you need. Second thing that I want to highlight here is I don't think this debate is about US interests, as I think some things in the debate talked about. The motion is not this House believes that West should, but this House supports, which means that we create a value judgment motion in a way that we ought to think of a possible benefit from a larger third-person perspective. I don't really care if US gets control over North Africa. What we're going to establish then is prevention and saving countless of infinite more lives in the future, absent the existing proliferation and expansion of the military junta. The only importance of the West is not their interest, but it's their capacity and whether they're able to, not to establish, don't hear me first, not to establish the governments as opening government jump to, but whether they are able to finish the work quickly. Opening opposition's only defense here, which was unresponded by opening government, is to say that, but you're hated by the people. We don't really care. Whether you're hated by the people is irrelevant to the amount of weaponry and to the amount of infantry soldiers, or the amount of, just a vast amount of soldiers available in the UN, for example, and the NATO. And I think you can just really drop ballistic missiles in the headquarters of the governments, whatever. I think a lot of these are mechanistic issues. I think the West is probably the only one who has the capacity to finish the invasion quickly, as opposed to getting a prolonged civil war. Speaking of civil war, I think what they're necessarily going to create is neighbors fighting neighbors, people fighting each other with the weapon, and they shoot each other with the US manufactured gun. And that probably means that also creates an equal amount of resentment compared to whether US soldiers actually step in. In fact, I would say that it's better for them to necessarily get their some people to just be murdered by a US soldier as opposed to their neighbor with a US manufactured gun. Because what that creates on their side is an internal civil war, which will substantially take a long time, which will actually impact a lot of things. The first thing is the global supply chain, for example. Given that I think opening opposition also claims that these military junta leaders are probably all very often isolationists. They they set high tariffs, they close barriers for trade, and that probably means that rare earth resources, for example, available in the Sahel and Western Africa region are probably unavailable to be exported, unavailable to be traded off in the global market. But it also keeps war going, which is more bloody and less possible recovery. Because, again, we don't care about the US. We don't care if they end up hating the US in the end. But we really care if they end up hating the other ethnicity. If they end up hating the other person within their vicinity. Because African countries' borders are are drawn randomly by Western countries. That means that sometimes the ethnicities mix and they probably have history of hating each other. You're only going to build up on that particular hatred and that particular prejudice that they probably have in their side of the house, such that they're unable to get any proper recovery. But lastly, you provide the military junta a chance to escape and consolidate, because the action is not swift. Because it's different when 10 US tanks shoot at you from outside of your building and just 10 persons shooting with their gun. That means that you're far more able to escape to another country, to consolidate your power, probably go just reach out to your best friend in Mali or in Guinea, for example, to consolidate more power and expand your domination in that particular region. So that probably means that the recovery is probably much less likely in their side of the house, given the current status quo is already lost cause. Opening.
CG is evil because it's exactly the white propaganda narrative that values white people's lives as more important over the lives of people with nuanced, complex politics inside the region, and just bomb them all as if they're all evil and deserve to die.
People with the nuanced, complex politics are fucked anyway from the beginning. Either they die because of bombs or either they die of starvation. In the end of the day, what we want to save is not the US white savior complex that's open government. Again, we care about people, infinite more people who are probably born there in the future. People who are in other regions who are not yet contaminated by the military junta. These are the people that we save. And if you think that these people have complex political capacity, you yourself are subjecting them to more danger and opening opposition. The final thing that I want to argue here is on prevention. And I think just the fact that military junta is very easy to spread. It's very easy to just expand. Why? Things like Russian support. Things like they have incentive to spread because they want to increase their domination area, for example. They have alliance between military junta. For example, the leaders of military junta in Burkina Faso and Guinea, for example, used to go to a same school together in French. And that means that they have a lot of community building. They have a lot of alliance, which to some extent means that if you don't necessarily deter them and say that if you step up and challenge your civilian government, the West is going to step in and bomb the fuck out of you, that means that you're going to incentivize all these other actors. For example, if you give aid, then they say, I should just dominate my region. What is the US going to do? Give me more aid. So that probably means that you're subjecting more people to more danger in their side of the house. In our side, again, necessary loss. We're not evil. We're realistic. This is war. Some people have to die. We said